The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Seeker After Truth by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. The Man Who Went in Search of His Fate. There was once a man, and there have been many like him both before and since, who decided that he should make a change in his life. What is the point, he asked himself, of trying to do things or letting things happen to me if I do not know my fate? If he worked against his fate, he reasoned, he would suffer, and in the end the fate would be the same. If, on the other hand, he did nothing, his destiny would be a minor and uninteresting one, like that of the thousands of ordinary people all over the world who had uneventful lives. He had to start somewhere, so he sold his few possessions and began to walk along the highway which passed through his hometown. He had not been walking for very long when he came to a tea house, where he saw a dervish sitting, talking to a number of people. The traveller, whose name was Akram, waited until the audience had gone, and then approached the man of wisdom. "Reverend man of the path," he said, "I am in search of my fate, and wonder whether you can suggest how I might start on this important endeavour." "This is easier believed possible than it is achieved," replied the dervish, "and it would be better to ask how to recognize your fate than to assume you can do so without preparation." "But I am sure that I can recognize my fate," cried Akram, "because it is well known that one's fate is a reflection of oneself, and surely I can tell if I meet someone who looks like me." "Looking like you externally is not the same thing as being a reflection of you," said the dervish, "especially when, like everyone else, you have so many sides that you find it hard to see your own reflection in all its forms. The mirror of perception is as fleeting and as miscellaneous as the wavelets of the sea, each briefly shining forth with the borrowed light of the sun as it breaks upon the seashore." The dervish continued in this vein for some time, and Akram, who had met dervishes before, stopped listening to him. He came to the conclusion that there would be nothing that he could profit from here. Still, he thought, it would be nice to have company on the journey. When the dervish had stopped talking, Akram said, "Mystical analogies are, of course, too deep for me to understand. But if you are travelling, might I accompany you, at least for part of the way? For I am unversed in the experiences and practices of journeying." The dervish agreed, and they set off along the road. Presently they saw a tree by the roadside, and from it was clearly to be heard a strong buzzing sound. The dervish said, "Put your ear to the trunk of the tree, and see what you can hear." Akram followed his advice and realized that the tree was hollow. Inside there was a very large number of bees. The dervish said, "The bees are trapped. If you can manage to break off that branch, they will be released and will be able to escape. It might be a kindly act, and who knows where it might lead." Akram answered, "Old man, you are not of this world. Has it not been said that one should not be distracted from one's objective by minor matters? Now, supposing that someone were to offer me some money for breaking the branch, I would accept, for I have no money for my journey. But to do it for nothing is absurd." "As you will," said the dervish, and they continued on their way. When it was dark, they lay down to sleep. In the morning they were woken by a man going past with 2 large jars strapped to the sides of his donkey. He stopped to pass the time of day. "Where are you going?" asked the dervish. "To market to sell this honey. It should fetch at least 3 pieces of gold. Yesterday I heard some bees in a hollow tree, and they seemed to want to get out. So I broke a dead branch and they swarmed. I found this huge amount of honey, and, from being a pauper, I am on the way to supporting myself." And he went on his way. Akram said to the dervish, "I should perhaps have got to the honey first, as you suggested. But on the other hand, it may not have been the same tree, and in that case I would probably have been stung, and that is not the fate I am looking for." The dervish said nothing. Further along the road they came to a bridge over a river and stopped to admire the view. Suddenly a fish poked its head out of the water and looked at them, its mouth opening and shutting in a quite pathetic way. "What do you think that means?" Akram asked. The dervish said, "Cup your hands with interlaced fingers and see whether you can understand the speech of the fish." When Akram did as the dervish suggested, he found that he could indeed understand the fish, who was saying, "Help me! Help me!" The dervish called out, "What help do you seek?" The fish answered, "I have swallowed a sharp stone. There is a certain herb growing in profusion on the river bank. If you would kindly pluck some and throw it to me, I could bring up the stone and find some relief." "A talking fish indeed," said Akram. "I think that this is some sort of a trick of magic or ventriloquism. I refuse to make myself ridiculous. In any case, I am in search of my fate. Dervish, if this strange happening is anything to do with you, perhaps you might care to help yonder fish yourself." The dervish only said, "No, I shall not do anything. Let us be on our way." Soon afterwards, they entered a town and sat down in the marketplace to rest. Presently a man came galloping into the square on a fine horse, obviously very excited. Dismounting, he shouted to the townspeople, "A miracle! A miracle!" As everyone gathered around the horseman, he said, "I was crossing a bridge when, believe it or not, a fish spoke to me, and it asked me to throw it some herbs. I did so, and after eating them it threw up a flawless diamond as big as both my fists." Akram called out, "How do you know that it is a real diamond?" "I am a jeweler," said the man. "How typical of life," said Akram, "that a man of wealth should get even more, while I, unable to succour the fish because I was on important business, am forced to beg my bread in the company of a most uninteresting dervish." The dervish said, "Oh well, perhaps it was not the same fish. Perhaps, indeed, that man is lying. Let us look forward and not back." "That is all rather like a philosopher," said Akram, "but much the same thoughts were in my own mind." They continued on their way. The next event in their journey was when they stopped to eat beside a rock embedded in the ground. A low humming seemed to be coming from the rock, and Akram put his ear to it. He found that the sound came from under the rock, and as he listened he could understand what it meant. It was a number of ants, and they were saying, "If we could only move this rock or get through it somehow, we would be able to extend our kingdom and find room for all our people. If only something could come to our aid. This hard material down here is too difficult to get through. If only someone or something would take it away." Akram looked at the dervish and said, "The ants want the rock moved, so that they can extend their kingdom. What have I to do with ants, rocks, or kingdoms? First I must find my fate." The dervish said nothing, and they continued on their way. The following day, when they were rising from their miserable bivouac under a hedge, they heard the sound of many people coming their way, singing and shouting with glee. Presently they saw that a large band of rustics was on the road, dancing and playing fiddles and pipes, leaping and somersaulting with delight. As they passed, Akram asked one of them what had happened. The man said, "A goat herd, believe it or not, heard some ants murmuring under a rock in great distress. He moved it so that they could extend their nest. What do you think he found underneath? Why, a huge treasure of gold pieces. He took it and shared it with all his neighbours, and we are the lucky villagers who benefited." They went on their way, still delirious with delight. The dervish said to Akram, "You are a fool, for you have thrice failed to do even the simplest thing that might have brought you the fortune which you desired. You are a fool, because you are even less prepared to follow your fate than all those people who just did a kind action and were not obsessed by their fate and their personal desires. You are a fool, for you have, instead of following your fate, distanced yourself from it by your behavior and your failure to look at what is beneath your nose. Above all, you are a fool because you did not attend to what I am and what I have said, not said and indicated." Akram, like many another before and since, became enraged. He shouted at the dervish, "Self-satisfied and domineering know-all! Anyone can be wise after the event. I notice that you, a miserable and underfed wanderer on the face of the earth, did not take any advantage of the great things which you are now such an expert upon. Perhaps you can tell me why that is." "I can indeed," replied the dervish. "I could not benefit myself because I had other things to do. You see, I am your fate." Then the dervish disappeared, and he has never been seen again, except, of course, by all the Akrams who have lived since that time, many, many years ago. The greed for obstinacy. There was once an honest man who had never, in his life, taken advantage of others. He was kind and hard-working, but he had not achieved any success in life. This man, whose name was Single-Mind, was constantly being betrayed and exploited, but this did not trouble him particularly, because, quite rightly, he knew that his own straightforwardness could not be corrupted by the villainy of others. Single-Mind practiced charity and generosity and kindness to the full extent of his capacity, reposing his trust in the justice which would follow such a life, as he was convinced it must. But he was not tranquil in mind, so he went to a Sufi and asked him what to do. The Sufi said, "Brother, honesty, hard work, kindness, these are all things which are of the utmost importance to humankind, if realization is to be attained. But you must make sure that you are really honest, that you are, indeed, not offsetting your generosity by an equally harmful greed for obstinacy in following your own opinions about your way of action." The Sufi offered him a way of observing and correcting himself, but Single-Mind did not like to hear his honesty described as obstinacy, and concluded that the Sufi must be wrong. He resolved, therefore, to make a journey to see the great Saint Musa al-Kazim, to seek his advice as to how his fortune and the prospects of spiritual development might be changed. He set off along the road. Presently this good man, crossing a wilderness, came upon a very fierce-looking tiger which was rolling in the dust. When he saw the traveller, the tiger stopped doing this and said, "Son of man, where are you going?" Single-Mind said, "Unfortunate in my past and present, uncertain as to my future, I am seeking the great Saint Musa al-Kazim, to beseech him to give me his advice." "I am sure the tiger," said the wild beast, "and I beg of you to ask the saint what I can do to improve my own condition, for I am miserable and out of sorts. There is something wrong with me, and I need perceptive advice." "Willingly," said Single Mind, and continued on his way. In the course of time he arrived at the bank of a river, and saw a great fish, with its mouth opening and shutting, half in and half out of the water. The fish said, "Son of man, where are you going?" Single Mind told all that had happened. "I am Mahi the fish," said the fish, "and there is something wrong with me. For some reason I cannot swim in the water, and I need some kind of help. Please ask the saint when you see him to send me advice on my problem." Single Mind promised to do so, and continued on his way. After much journeying, the pilgrim came upon 3 men. They were wearily digging in a piece of sandy ground. Single Mind stopped and asked them why they were labouring so hard in such an unpromising field. "We are the 3 sons of a good man who has recently died," they told him. "Our father left us this land and told us to dig it, which is what we are doing, but it seems to us that it is so poor that nothing will ever grow on it." They asked Single Mind what his mission was, and when he told them, they begged him to ask for the saint's solution to their own difficulty. Single Mind willingly promised to help them in this way, and continued on his journey. Eventually the traveller reached his destination, and found the great teacher sitting, as always, modestly and without ostentation, with a group of people who had come to learn from him. When Single Mind approached, the saint said, "Speak." And Single Mind said, "I am such and such a man, and I have come to seek your help. But before I do so, I have certain representations to make, Lord, on behalf of 3 men, a fish and a tiger whom I met on my long journey, and who may be deserving of your kindness." When asked to continue, he recited the difficulties which beset the men, the fish, and the animal. "Your presence might now kindly deign to allow this unworthy person to describe his own condition, so that advice for him, too, might generously be forthcoming." But Musa al-Kazim said, "My brother, your answer has already been contained in what I have advised." So Single Mind retraced his steps, wondering how he could understand, from what the saint had said, how to solve his own problems. In due time he came upon the 3 men, still working in the barren field. He told them, "I have consulted the great saint, and this is his advice. Let the 3 men," he said, "dig in the exact middle of the field. They will find an underground chamber with treasures which are theirs. This is the meaning of the instruction of their father to dig the field." Single Mind helped the 3 men to follow this advice, and presently they came upon a treasure of incalculable size, together with a number of remarkable instruments which would enable people to achieve what most men call wonders, whether in the service of humanity or otherwise. The brothers offered Single Mind his pick of gold or of the wondrous devices, but he said, "Kind friends, I have only done my duty. All this belongs to you, and I have no right to covet it. May you be in peace." And he went on his way. Eventually, too, he came upon the great fish, who asked him if he had been able to obtain any guidance for the relief of her suffering. "Lady Fish," said Single Mind, "the great saint has, by his wonderful perceptions, alleviated the lot of 3 pauper brothers, indicating a treasure to them. His advice about your case was as follows. Let a blow be struck on the left side of the head of the fish, and she will thenceforward be able to swim and gambol in the water quite normally." The fish begged Single Mind to help, so he took his staff and struck her a blow on the place which the saint had indicated. No sooner had he done so than the fish slid into the water and swam, leaping and playing with unrestrained joy. Then she glided through the water to Single Mind and thanked him deeply for his help. But Single Mind said, "Mahi, when I struck your head, it split a lump which seems to have been upsetting your balance." "Yes, yes," said Mahi, "but that is nothing to me. I only know that I am free and well." Single Mind continued, "Out of that place on your head has dropped, and is here on the bank, a diamond larger than a watermelon. Take it, or someone will surely steal it." "And what is that to me, a fish?" said Mahi, and she streaked away, calling down blessings upon her benefactor. "Oh, my sister," Single Mind called out after her, "you will be robbed if I leave the jewel lying here." And he threw the huge gem into the water near where he had seen the fish disappear. Ultimately, going his way, the traveller came to the place where the troubled tiger sat. He recited all his adventures, and the tiger asked what Musa al-Kazim had advised in his own case. "The saint," said Single Mind, "specifically stated that your condition could be alleviated only by devouring a fool. Do that, and you will have no further troubles." "And neither will you," roared the tiger, leaping upon him. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.